Hey everyone, we're being told we need to start. Is it helpful if I talk like this in front of you? We need to go. Hey everyone, if you thanks everyone for coming out. Grab a drink, grab some beverages. I think someone think I should send it at the end. So yeah, yeah. I think it's not about me.
I'm not sure that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
now I hear myself. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. It's the first. Woo! It's the first Austin Climate Hub event of the year. It's amazing to see such an incredible turnout. I think we had almost 150 RSVPs. Also, we've got some room up here if anyone wants to come in. You know, just don't make Bridget, Chip, feel like you want to be in here. Our very first Austin Climate Hub event was in October of 2023, which is quite a while ago now. It's amazing to see how this has grown. I think we're over 500 folks now. Obviously, great turnout. So first up, just want to say thank you and really excited for the year ahead. We started the Austin Climate Hub with a vision and a mission to accelerate clean tech and clean energy and climate innovation here in Austin and to support the broader energy ecosystem. And that's really what this is all about, thought leadership and getting everyone in the same room. I wanted to first just say a huge thank you to our sponsors for making this possible. And then quite literally, none of this would be happening without Pillsbury Law and also Escalon. Pillsbury has sponsored our very first event. They've sponsored every single other one since. And so truly a day one sponsor. Before I hop into a few other things, Andy, do you want to just say a little bit about Pillsbury? Yeah.
Thank you, and of course, all that applause is for you, Sean. So, no, I mean, but really, this event and this community wouldn't exist but for your work. So we're happy to have a part in that, just a very small role in supporting what you're building and bringing this community together so that we can talk about issues like the policy changes that come with an administrative change. This is, a big time for many of these companies and these founders as they think about what comes next. At Pillsbury, I'm a corporate lawyer. I work with a variety of early stage companies, help them get funded, grow their business, ultimately scale them to the point where they can go public or we help sell them. In that role, I act as a concierge to the law firm. I get to introduce founders to folks like Ashley, my colleague here who does work on environmental matters and helps clients look around the corners to see what's next in that area. Chris Drymala is in the crowd here somewhere. He's one of our IP lawyers, and he does work helping companies protect the innovations that they come up with. Patrick Dolan is a corporate associate who works with me in helping companies to build and fund their dream. Together as a team, along with many other people across Pillsbury, we help support innovation. We're really happy to be able to do that, both in our day job and through events like this that bring you all together. So Sean, thank you again for putting this together.
Thank you again. And also thank you to Mike and Escalon as well. We heard from them off the panel. So folks, super excited for the topic today. I've been wanting to do a panel on energy policy, honestly, for at least a year now. The intersection of policy, markets, and energy is fascinating. Literally thousands of economics PhDs have written on this topic every single year. But it's a lived reality, really, for anyone in the industry. And we wanted to take a minute to, number one, I think just dive into a fascinating topic. And obviously with the inauguration on Monday, new administration, potentially new policy sort of context, thought this would be cogent. You don't really need to hear that much from me because we've got a set of really incredible panelists. I'm super excited for the brain trust we have tackling this topic today. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to hop right into it. First up, we have Jerry. Is it Polacek or Polacek? Polacek. Okay, the C is CH. President of the Energy Transition at Agreco Group. Also formerly managing director of GE Capital, CEO, chief investment officer of two really impressive renewable energy and infrastructure funds before that. So really sort of bringing us the perspective of what's it like, the folks on the ground that are actually living this reality each day. Then we have Kaiba White. She sits on the Electric Utility Council for the city of Austin. She's also leads policy at Public Citizen, doing God's work when it comes to things involving Austin Energy and a lot of other stuff. So bringing a great perspective from there. Dub Taylor, legend on the many. First of all, advisor on the Conservative Texans for Energy Innovation on the PACE Authority. Many years, I think almost 20 years. At the Texas Conservation Committee. Sorry, what's it? Yeah.
State Energy Conservation Office.
State Energy Conservation Office, basically all things renewable in Texas. And yeah, I think that hit a little bit. And then, of course, Ashley Myers from Pillsbury, who leads environmental law as a partner there, also on the front line. So, great topic. Let's get into it. You don't need to hear any more from me. All right, cool. So Jerry, I'd like to kick it off with you as the president of energy transition at Aggreko Energy. You are really on the front lines when it comes to operating in any policy and regulatory environment. You're putting capital at risk. You are making decisions, both sort of short-term and long-term strategy, every single day in the context of what the regulatory requirements are, what the policy requirements are, what it means to be compliant. And so I wanted to ask you, maybe just to open us up, what is good policy? What's bad policy? What does it look like from your perspective? And ideally, as you address the question, explain a little bit about what Aggreko Energy does, and examples from your lived experience around examples of good policy and examples of bad policy.
Sure. Thanks for that, Sean, and thanks for hosting us. I'll give you just a brief background on our company, too, because it'll help inform my comments. But I've been with two partners now for about 10 years, and this is now our third venture that we've started up. This particular venture is in an existing energy company, and we were basically brought in to help with their energy transition. And so we basically are building a renewable energy independent power producer from the ground up. And we were basically 2 years ago given a blank sheet of paper and asked where we thought some of the most compelling investment opportunities are. And so our business is focused on two areas: utility scale, solar and storage. And within those markets, we're focused mostly on deregulated markets, so ERCOT, CAISO, PJM, and then distributed energy. And there we, last summer, we bought a company, Infinity Energy, focused on C&I, so on-site decarbonization, solar and storage, and we're also doing community solar. So we're in, basically we went from zero to today we have over 100 investments in 13 states. And so if you just think about the life cycle of investments, and literally we have projects that we went out and found the sites that were, dirt. It was, farmers or ranchers' land, and now we're breaking ground on these projects. So as we look at policy and good policy, there are a few things that are important. It's number one, is the policy clear? Is it bankable? And we look at policy from a cycle time as well. And so, give you an example. We just finished building 60 megawatts of projects in upstate New York. So, community solar. New York State is the leading market for community solar. It's over 2 gigawatts. And so, as we were looking at different markets to invest, number one, you take comfort that it's a proven market, right? There's been a lot of capital, a lot of projects deployed. And then you sort of look at why is that? And, the projects are scalable. You can invest up to projects of up to 5 megawatts. The state itself has high energy prices. And so when you're doing the smaller projects, the unit economics really matter. And so when you think about the revenue for those projects, it's off of retail electric rates. And so, there's a policy for community solar. Well, the objective is to deploy community solar in that state, and the results kind of speak for themselves. So what we found is an example, and to contrast it with other states, we can go find the right sites. We could line up consumers and save them money, and everybody that subscribes with us is saving 10% or more on their utility bills. In that policy as well, it's working with the utility, so there's consolidated billing where the utility has the relationship with customers, and they're better suited to do the billing. They have millions of customers. We only have a few thousand. And so it's more efficient to get it done. And then, ultimately, too, with the policies, they have state agencies in place that are supportive and encouraging those. So we find the sites, and we go through the permitting project. And when the projects are ready to come online, they qualify for the community solar program. And so I'd contrast that, just to give you one example, with New Jersey. In the case of New Jersey for community solar, it's a smaller program, and there's an annual bidding into that program. And so, to give you an example, last year, I think, there was probably 5 or 10% of those that bid in were awarded projects. Well, that's really difficult, right? You have capital commitments lined up, and so you have this project that the awards are only going to happen once a year. How do you develop projects, right, and go through and put the engineering in place, do the interconnections, raise the capital, and you don't know if you're going to be awarded or not? So with New York, we find the good sites, we develop them, we comply with the policy, and the result is we're saving a lot of money with the consumers that subscribe to our projects. So
Amazing. Very. And then I think really appreciate that example, that perspective, and yeah, something as simple as the allocation, the timing, pricing really makes a difference to whether or not you can actually make a project viable. So Kaiba and then Dub, bringing the perspective of the EUC, the Electric Utility Commission, and also the perspective of policy advocacy at Public Citizen. Dub, your extensive career at the State Energy Conservation Office, Texas Space Authority, and now the Texas Services Coalition. We just heard some real-world examples of good policy, of bad policy, and wanted to actually ask both of you guys, where is this policy coming from? So what in your opinion is the role of policy? What are the motivations of regulators? What are they trying to achieve, right? 'Cause, obviously, this isn't just arbitrary bad policy for the sake of bad policy, and sometimes policy is good. But what ultimately do you think is driving that from the policy and the regulator perspective? Kaiba first.
There's a lot. Okay, sorry about that. I guess maybe just starting kind of zoomed out, at least from, I think, my perspective and that of my organization, we are a consumer protection organization. We, work on environmental policy. Climate change is definitely one of our strong motivations, as well as other, air pollution and protecting communities from those health impacts. So I would say, in a broad sense, good policy should take into account all of the realities. I think it's bad policy when we ignore certain, outcomes and just say, well, those are externalities, those are somebody else's problem, right? Because it all kind of comes back around. And I think we are really seeing that in the energy space when it comes to climate change, right? We have more extreme weather, we have higher demand, we have more stress on our grid. Now, there's a lot of other things also driving that, but that is certainly one of them. But I guess just kind of to bring it down to some things that I've been working on lately, and I'll let Dub kind of take the state level, but I do a lot of work, as Sean mentioned, with Austin Energy. And I'm super excited because just earlier this week, Austin Energy launched a new solar program. It's called the Solar Standard Offer, and it really kind of addresses what Jerry was just talking about with that kind of uncertainty of whether or not you're going to actually get a contract. Austin Energy had gone out for a couple different RFPs for local solar projects, and then in the end, even worse than Jerry's example, they didn't contract for any projects. And so everybody was, left in the unfortunate situation of having invested their time and resources in developing those proposals, and then nothing moved forward, which is, bad on multiple fronts. So, myself and some other advocates, really worked collaboratively with Austin Energy to try to come up with a solution that could make use of our plentiful sunny rooftop space here in Austin that is, does not currently have solar, and can do it in a way that provides certainty to the utility and also to those financiers, those developers, everybody, involved. And so the program, this solar standard offer, sets the criteria and sets a price, and it is up to the developer to manage the relationship with a property owner to, lease or however they are going to obtain rights to use their rooftop space and develop that solar energy, and then are guaranteed to be able to sell that at the set rate to Austin Energy. I expect that we're going to hopefully soon hear some really exciting results from this first week. And, this first round of the program is focused on kind of medium to larger commercial sized buildings. But even starting next week, there's going to be community stakeholder process to open that up to also include smaller commercial and residential buildings. So I think that's the other thing that kind of makes for good policy is having collaborative policymaking process that ask for input from community, from potential market participants on the front end, so that you can try to address some of the pitfalls before you launch a program and then have it flop. I'll pause there. There's a lot more that I could talk about.
Very exciting, and folks obviously just jump in as we go. Dub, I'd love to hear your take on what makes good policy and motivations of policymakers.
Yeah, so this perspective is maybe similar to what you as companies and investors face. I spent my public sector career not so much in the policy arena, but in the policy implementation business. And so the things that made that challenging were reactive policies, things that were not really sort of long-term, visionary, durable, provided predictability. And policymakers, as most are elected officials, they're pushed in these positions of being responsive and being reactive without a lot of time to really think through consequences of what these policies, may deliver. So I think that's one thing, is avoid, reactive policies and think about long-term, more durable policies. Another aspect is there's a tendency to kind of short circuit and pick winners versus solve for attributes or characteristics, particularly in the technology space. So, the last person in the door with the best widget who's made their case, is probably going to get, better recognition and billing in legislation that gets passed because they're the loudest or the most frequent voice. That's not a good thing, because that may make perfect sense at the time, but 3 years later it doesn't. So again, kind of staying away from picking winners is another thing as well. And then I would say the other thing, and this is just my personal belief, and I've seen, frankly, encroachment at the state level on local policies, but I think policy should be made closest to those impacted by it. So that means local governments on local policies. It means at the state level, we don't want the feds in our business. Well, the state shouldn't be in the locals' business. So I couldn't say that when I worked for the state. I can say that now. But
Yeah, I think that point around solving for or favoring on attributes as based on versus technology is so key. I mean, the fact that batteries are not considered dispatchable, but only natural gas peakers dispatchable, I think is a classic example of trying to pick a winner as opposed to trying to pick a solution and letting the market back solve how you actually get there. So Ashley, we couldn't have a panel discussion on policy without talking a little bit of politics. Obviously, we just had the inauguration, and there's a lot of consternation about what the future looks like here. What are the types? What are the kind of the key concerns or questions you're hearing from your clients as they look at the world in 2025?
Sure. So as both Andy and Sean mentioned earlier, I'm primarily an environmental lawyer. I practice mostly in the regulatory space, but also do quite a bit of litigation as well. So primarily what I'm advising clients on are, compliance, what regulatory entitlements do you need, how do you deal with your regulators. So as you can all imagine, since the election last November, clients are mostly just concerned with, like what Deb was talking about, what is this big pendulum swing in the policy landscape? In my world, specifically for environmental, like what does that mean for us? Like practically, what does this mean? Because, clients want certainty. They want a long-term understanding of what their risk profile is, what their regulatory requirements are, and what that looks like. Because it just, it takes a lot of capital and time investment. Many of the entitlements I assist clients in getting, sometimes takes years, and that's not an exaggeration. I've had, several take pushing a decade. So these are huge investments, long-term investments, and when you have these big policy swings, there's consternation about, okay, well, what does this mean for what I have to do in order to comply with all of my regulatory requirements? And so right now, and just to preface this, I represent clients across industries, so it's not necessarily energy specific, but certainly have both traditional and renewable energy clients as well. A lot of folks right now are, wondering, like, what am I hearing about this? There's going to be streamlined permitting. This is great. This is fantastic for me. And so a lot of what we're talking about right now is, okay, but what does that mean? If our government is now adopting a policy of deregulation, making permitting easier, how does that play out in reality? And the reality is you can't just donate a sum certain of money and your permits will get pushed through, at least not in the legal sense, right? I'm speaking as in my role as a lawyer, right? It takes a literal act of Congress to implement regulatory reform. And so we're starting to see folks really come to terms with, you can't just have this sweeping executive order saying environmental permitting is no longer a thing, or jump through these certain hoops and we can make this faster for you. So we're seeing the policy start to inform the regulatory sphere. And folks on the inside are really focused currently on regulatory reforms within Congress to make permitting more streamlined and easier. Now, I think that as an environmentalist, it hurts, but for some of my clients, this is a tremendous opportunity to get projects pushed through. And this trickles down even in the renewable energy space, right? If, say, for example, you're having to conduct an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement because one of your projects has a federal nexus and it requires such an approval, those are massive undertakings that take sometimes many years, and it can stop absolutely every bit of development that you're doing. So to have permitting reform that's guided by the policy direction of this administration, many renewables clients are being benefited by that incidentally. So what we're talking about right now with clients is, okay, well, what are my long-term risks? How do I take advantage of this changing landscape to get my projects entitled in a way that is beneficial and quick now, but will endure in the future? So not subject to legal challenge going forward because you take a more streamlined approach.
Makes a ton of sense. Jerry, does that track, or how's Greco thinking about approaching the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, so anybody that's in the industry right now, it's a time of significant uncertainty, and for those of us that have been in for a long time, right? Take solar, known as the solar coaster, right? And so this is just another, we've had the benefit of the last 2 years of the IRA of policy certainty we haven't had in, ever. And so I'll give you a few examples of things that we're dealing with right now. So we have pipelines of projects that we want to break ground on, and we will this year. As an example, we were working on raising a construction warehouse facility so that on these smaller C&I solar projects, it's easy to reduce if it fits the box, the underwriting box of the bank, it's easy to drop them in. And so we've been talking with 3 or 4 banks at the end of the year and looking at getting term sheets in the first quarter. And so we checked back after the inauguration with one of the big banks that you would recognize, and they basically have said, look, we're going to continue seeing how this policy plays out. And so, the big thing that's out there right now is, what they're planning at the federal level will get accomplished through budget reconciliation, right? And so there's the tax policy aspect of it, of pruning the IRA in order to, compensate for the tax cuts that are expiring at the end of the year. And so there's really the question of, does that bill get done? Does that get addressed in the spring when they're talking about, some of the immigration policy and other things that they want to address? Or the tax part of it, does it get pushed to the end of the year, right? And it's sort of a mixed bag. It's hard to plan, though. And so the beauty is of the U.S. solar industry, we basically have 20 years of precedent in terms of tax credits. And so fortunately, there's a lot of case law and precedents. So as an example, there's ability to safe harbor projects. And there are a few different methods, but one method that you can use in order to sort of grandfather those tax credits is through incurring 5% of your capital costs. And so you could do that. You could place an order for modules or other components. And it's really the difference, though, between the bigger players and the small players. So my parent company has a good balance sheet, and so we could afford to, commit a significant amount of money. And the benefit is, if you meet that 5% safe harbor, you basically it's designated that you started construction on those projects, and then you have 3 or 4 years to basically complete them. So it gives you a pathway for that pipeline to bring it into reality. And the key thing is with the tax credits, right? Through the Inflation Reduction Act, on average, you're getting 30% of your capital costs through a tax credit. And so, the fact is, the reason why I'm optimistic about the solar industry, the fundamental economics, solar is, the sort of most efficient from a, levelized cost of capital for several years now. And the tax credits really make the difference on the margin. So to give you an example, we're finishing up construction on a project in Texas with an energy company that has committed to decarbonizing its operations. And so it's a 13 megawatt project. The power purchase agreement that we have with them is very competitively priced. So it's roughly $40 a megawatt hour. Without that tax credit, that project would never get done. It's just, it's the delta between being in the money and being out of the money. And so those are things that we're looking at, and the whole industry is really looking at. And so the way I kind of look at this year is the sooner we could get that clarity around policy, the industry will adapt and can adapt. And it's just this period of uncertainty that is the most difficult.
Makes a ton of sense. And actually a great segue for my next question. So I think so far we've been talking almost exclusively about policy. I think, but we need to be careful not to give the impression that policy is destiny when it comes to the future of energy. That would be very inaccurate and irresponsible. There's technology, there's economics, there's competition, there's the constant evolution of cost structures. Obviously, this is all happening in the context of load growth, stress on the grid due to multiple factors. And so I wanted to ask, in particular, I think, Dub and Kaiba, but obviously other folks jump in. How much will policy, particularly under the new administration, impact the trajectory of renewables over the next couple years? Is it, profoundly, partially. In certain areas, just you know, there's a lot of other factors. I see Victor shaking his head at me. There's given all these other factors, policy is only one of them. How much do you think? What's your overall view on renewables going forward, and in particular, how much of a role policy will play within that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess one thing, I mean, and Jerry just talked about this, is projects that are you know, relying on tax credits and other things where there's some period of uncertainty. You know, there may be a pause to wait for things to settle out and better understand impacts of those things. But I think, you know, setting policy aside, the fundamentals, particularly of solar in Texas, are just there. The technology, you know, aligns with peak demand in the afternoons. With battery, we can shift that and shape the output. It makes perfect sense here to address cooling load. From a resiliency standpoint, you see, you know, companies that are investing in their own microgrids, more for resiliency purposes, and you know, with carbon and climate benefits quantified. But you know, fundamentally, you know, they've lost power before. They've had huge losses with, you know, perishable goods or whatever it may be. That's not going to happen again. And so they're doing it for different reasons, you know, aside from the policy. If you have complementary policies that are available and in place at the time, they certainly will factor in and be part of that. But those projects are probably going to move forward regardless.
Yeah, and I would just, I should just leave it on. Yeah, just kind of, you know, yes, there's companies that are investing in microgrids, and I think we've also seen a huge uptick in the residential sector also investing in solar paired with batteries, and it's for the same reasons, essentially, you know, not wanting to be without power, and you know, certainly in my work doing community organizing, you know, community outreach, that is a concern to everybody, and you know, I think it's great that technology is there, and I do see that as something that is going to continue to accelerate regardless of, you know, what any administration, you know, supports or doesn't, because everybody has that choice. That said, I think, you know, I think there is an essential kind of link to policy there, right? It is, you know, possible for some people to do that no matter what, and becomes impossible financially for other people to do it without that policy support. And that policy support can come at multiple levels. Certainly the federal tax credits are, you know, of utmost importance, but you also have state level policies and local policies, and the utility rate structure ends up being a big factor in many cases when it comes to that distributed solar kind of payback time. Although once you add the battery in, that piece sort of becomes less important, right? The consumer can then sort of take control of their own energy and not be entirely off grid, but kind of behave in a way that is a little more off grid. And we've seen that in some of the electric utilities, especially electric co-ops around the state of Texas, changing their policies so that the customer gets a much lower rate for energy that they send back onto the grid from their solar energy systems. But where customers have batteries or they have something like an electric vehicle to charge, they are aware of that signal, that price signal, that market signal that they're getting sent. And so unfortunately, that means they might be charging their electric vehicle at the same time that ERCOT is sending out a conservation call because they don't want to send power back to the grid. So yeah, it's complicated. I think there's no escaping that policy does have an impact on many people's, you know, kind of day-to-day decision making and what they can do in their homes. But we'll see at least a certain sector of society that's able to kind of move forward either way.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought up the distributed energy resources like rooftop solar and battery. I mean, in particular in this moment of growth on the grid, load growth, distribution level congestion. I mean, everything else is happening right now. You know, you have these assets that are behind the meter that are basically installed and paid for by customers, and yet we have such low adoption in Texas, and it's you know, it makes no sense, right? Everyone wins, and to your point, it's it's policy, right? It's the rate at which you are able to see or not see your incentives as a customer in price. It's that sort of kind of perverse logic of basically charging your battery at a retail rate and then theoretically selling it back to the grid at a wholesale. And yeah, certainly an area I think policy is behind the opportunity and the economics really and the desire.
If I could add just
Yeah.
so one thing. So one of the hats I wear these days, I work with PACE financing, property assessed clean energy financing across the state. And part of the motivation we see from a lot of property owners, particularly on new construction, where they're going higher performance systems and above code at the outset of the project, is they view these projects they're building as 50, 75, 100-year assets. And so they're making decisions at the front end that are either going to benefit or going to haunt the project through its life cycle. And they're trying to mitigate, they're sort of trying to future-proof their facilities against market swings, policy swings, environmental, you name it, and how do they kind of harden and take some of those things into account at the front end. So we see that increasingly, just given some of the history recently with natural disaster issues and other things that have impacted these facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, I think so far in the discussion we've almost been talking about industry players in the market as being sort of completely separate or orthogonal to policy and the environment in which they operate. However, obviously these things are actually dynamic from the interpretation of a law or a statute and gray zone through to potentially policy advocacy, both for good and bad. Can you talk a little bit more about, I don't know, whether sort of from the perspective of Pillsbury or just advising clients, or in general the interplay between the folks that are living this reality day by day, and I think and sort of the relationship between industry and sound policy.
Yeah, so there's certainly a duality to it, right? I mean, I feel like that's what we've heard from almost everyone on the panel today, where there's inputs and outputs, both between the people who are living the day to day and then the people who are making the policy. So like certainly within Pillsbury, we have a public policy group. They've rebranded to a name that I can never remember, but they're a public policy group. Part of it is keeping ahead of trends and understanding what's going on and how certain industry groups might be impacted. So it's so important just to be engaged and loud and vocal. But, the flip side to that is also like, see what's happening in other places and in other forums, right? So kind of going back to your last question, we see this huge shift in the federal policy. But then you look and there's certain other mechanisms that are currently at play that actually disincentivize what federal policy would suggest. And those are going to keep continuing to play out in the background in parallel to this federal policy shift, which our clients are living day to day. So you have your federal administration saying death to renewables, we're going to go back to traditional energy. You have to live with it. But then on the other hand, you are seeing clients who are directly impacted by state and local policies and programs and regulations, even international, that require them to take a different approach that's inconsistent with federal policy. So for example, you take the EU border tax. Clients across the board are going to be impacted that irrespective of who sits in the White House. And then we see some really cool things happening at the state level as well. So I'm sure you all have heard about, a couple years ago, the SEC was going to mandate climate disclosures, and they passed a regulation that got caught up in litigation. It's been largely just sitting in litigation for the past 8 months or so. And I fully expect that this administration will just drop the regulation altogether and that goes away, and then federal climate disclosures are just not a thing for the foreseeable future. But in parallel, you have the state of California, who has implemented its own version of that, requiring both emissions reporting and then climate-related risk disclosures. So it's 2 different requirements. Those go into effect starting in January of 2026 to report on 2025, so clients are collecting data now. So you see, like the states are actually leading here, and so we have clients who are facing these very opposing discourse, and trying to figure out how do you comply within that. The states are also taking a really interesting lead in another way, specifically related to carbon emissions. Several states have passed what's called a climate superfund law. Vermont started, New York just finalized there at the end of the year. Two more in the works. California is now talking about reviving theirs, but essentially what it is these states are determining which of the oil and gas majors contributed most to the climate change and the climate change related impacts that are happening in their states, and are requiring those emitters to pay into a fund of several billions of dollars so that the state can mitigate climate related disasters and build in resiliency to their systems. And so you see like that kind of disincentive happening as well. And then of course you have corporations who don't necessarily operate outside of the influence of policy, but they have the authority to mandate their own internal policies, or maybe they have a renewables procurement requirement. So you're seeing these other factors at play that are inconsistent with the federal policy and happening, irrespective of federal policy.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Both the countervailing regulatory regimes, but also demand drivers, right? I mean, do you want to sell to California? Do you want to sell to Europe? If so, you need to be able to, at a minimum, you have your carbon tracking and accounting. Jared, and I should love to get your take on this. I think there's also some other pretty substantial ones. The net, and you mentioned this briefly, net zero requirements, renewables procurement coming from big tech. Actually, a lot of corporations driving down, having their own internal net zero standards, driving that down into tier 1, tier 2, and basically further down their supply chain. I think there were a few other ones that I had in mind, but I guess Jerry, obviously, on these countervailing factors, are you between potentially more uncertain, if not, maybe even discriminatory policy versus the fact that we have this incredible load growth, the fact that our grid is going to break if we don't have more distributed energy resources, I could I could also list a long list of things that makes me very, very optimistic about this year. I want to get your take.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the year plays out with the policy, and you've seen some of these companies pulling back their, DEI policies, whether or not that cascades into ESG and whatnot. Our experience, and we're talking with Fortune 500 companies every day, and I don't think it changes in terms of their commitments to the environment and whatnot. I think they're getting it, in terms of as a recruiting thing. The people in their companies want to be proud of the companies that they work for and whatnot. And so we're seeing, just this morning we had a discussion with a company, and one of the beauties of the company I'm in now, the parent company's in 65 countries. So we've been working with, and it's an interesting story too. The original company we've been working with in multi-states is a big box company that you would know, and they're focused not only on their scope 2, but they started looking at their scope 3. And so that led to an introduction to one of their suppliers for a product. And so now we've been talking with this product company, and we're doing their rooftop projects on their manufacturing facilities in California and Illinois. And we just made the introduction. They have operations in the UK, and we're having our UK team now take that on. I will say the key thing, though, the common denominator, and we're talking with hundreds of customers each year, the economics still matter, right? And so in any of these discussions, they have their sustainability commitments, et cetera, but it's a tough discussion if you're not at least able to have parity with the grid pricing, and or where they're in utility districts where they see the inflation and they can enter into a PPA where we fix the price for 10 or 20 years for them.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think battery at $25 a megawatt hour in the next 5 years makes that point around, or 10, whatever it is. I just think the economics become honestly just unsurmountable in terms of the advantage of renewables in a time frame that is, sooner than later. But anyway, I wanted to ask one last question here to our entire set of panelists. So, quick around the horn. The long arc of policy does bend toward progress. 120 years ago, we, rightly so, instituted these monopolies of centralized generation and distribution with a set rate base, because for a whole bunch of reasons that economically was the best way to electrify, America. But if you look back to, say, the 80s and the 90s, we had deregulation. We now have much lower energy prices of that. We have a purely merchant market here, obviously in Texas. We have renewables making up by far the vast majority of new supply as a result of that. We have this proliferation of distributed energy resources with a whole bunch of digitization going on. And so kind of a multi-part or choose your favorite part of the question here. Number one, where do you see energy policy going in the future? Like, what does this look like 15, 10, I mean, I think 5 is too soon, but like in the 10 to 15 years out, like what does policy look like, right? For instance, do we see grid neutrality? Or if you had, one wish in your energy czar and you could change one piece of policy, what would that be? I don't know, Kaiba, do you want to start? And we can kind of ping pong around.
Yeah, I guess I think if we look out 10, 15 years, I expect that there's going to be a much stronger emphasis on local distributed energy solutions. And, just kind of looking at Texas, I surely hope that those projections of nearly doubling demand do not come to fruition, because I think a lot of us are going to be in the dark if they do. But, even just looking today in Texas and the ERCOT grid, the challenges that we are having are not just because of energy supply, it's much more because of a lack of transmission and transmission constraints. And, the ERCOT grid is already, under-stressed, already incurring billions of dollars in transmission cost, and yet we're still behind, and we're going to likely remain behind, especially because there are so many data centers coming online and going to continue to come online. And, just kind of looking at that and knowing that the cost and the time that it takes to implement transmission solutions, I think there is going to, just come a time when a lot of that kind of energy and focus that has been, on those larger scale energy production, be it from fossil fuels or renewable energy, is going to shift more towards where the customers are, because that's the challenge. And certainly in our work here in Austin, that has been our big challenge, is, the utility having the megawatt hours available, but not able to get them to customers in an affordable way. And then sometimes not having the megawatt hours available because they're getting curtailed because of transmission constraints. So I do think that the customer side is going to be forced to the forefront, which I think is ultimately a good thing for many reasons, including environmental impact is reduced, fewer transmission lines, but also you're using land twice when you do that, right? You've already developed a building, let's put solar on it. You've got a parking lot, let's put solar on it. I hope we don't have to, reach collapse before we get to that point. But I do think that, there has been a lot of progress in terms of the efficiency of buildings. And I think that's an area where it's really low hanging fruit, right? Just to use less energy. But then also the solar, the batteries, and then demand response at every level of customer, I think is going to become absolutely essential to maintaining reliability and affordability on the grid. And so I think a lot of things that we are all just kind of leaving on autopilot are going to start to, be automated to respond to grid conditions in a way that will be beneficial as a whole.
1,000,000,000% agree that load growth leads to acceleration of distributed energy resources. I mean, even just not just from like the cost and the engineering perspective, but just from the speed, right? Like the amount of time it takes to organize your EV charging versus trying to build a utility scale of anything, whether it's solar or gases. I mean, it's for sure it's happening. I agree.
Yeah, just kind of building off that. So customer is king, right? And so policies long-term that support what customers want, I think are those that survive. Those that sort of, shortchange what customers really want for some other priority don't. And Sean, I shared with you earlier, but there's an interesting quick story, history lesson for those of you all that weren't in Texas in the mid-90s. But at the time, we had vertically integrated investor-owned utilities, and the traditional planning process involved integrated resource planning. So the utilities would look at what potential load growth was, how to serve the customers. They'd come up with a set of solutions, and then they would propose to the regulators, we put this in the rate base, we recover our costs for this solution. Very traditional, utility policy, engineers running utilities at the time, and their solution was more central plants and transmission. That's the solution. And a utility at the time, predecessor to the AEP companies that are now operating in Texas called Central Southwest Services, took a different approach. And they said, what if we asked the customers what they would do? And what if we gave them the keys to the kingdom and allowed them to make the decisions? So they brought in a third party to sort of run what's called a deliberative polling exercise. They brought in a representative sample of customers and said, okay, here are the choices. Here are the consequences. Here are the costs. What would you do? And the customer said, we would do efficiency and renewables, which is counter to what the utility engineers and planners said they would do. And so they said, well, that's interesting. And so this utility did this in several of their different areas of the state with their footprint, very consistent results. Then the other utilities did it, very consistent results. You can Google it as deliberative polling, Texas Utilities. Professor at UT at the time, Bruce Buchanan, oversaw this. He's at Stanford now. And but again, those things that advantage the customer are going to be those things that survive.
Yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, it's in the job description to be cynical, so I'm trying not to be cynical about energy policy over the next 10 or 15 years. But like I echo what the two of you are saying. I feel like, we live in a world where you come to expect these huge policy swings, but if you peek behind the curtains and you see what's actually happening within the industry, you see it's more durable than I think we all even realize. And that, certainly for renewables, it's growing in a way that, while it may be a slowdown, it won't be a stop. And so for me, I find that that's cause for hope.
I totally agree. I think there's still this like lingering perception that somehow renewables require like government support or subsidies, when in reality it's like the market economics and the momentum and the use cases are there. I think it's much more a concern about purely perverse and prejudicial policy. But yeah, I mean, would maintaining the IRA and other things help accelerate, particularly with things like distributed energy resources? Yes, of course. But the concern is much more around negative policy as opposed to like this industry needing support.
Yeah, Sean, I'd really echo what the other panelists have said. I think, look at your customer, which is the consumer, and have a policy that delivers affordable energy that's reliable. So put these principles in place. And you look at the current grid, and it's effectively like having 50 different markets. And, our ownerships in the UK, and we're explaining to them, how the US operates and how one state's different than the others. But, ultimately you have these regulated
municipalities,
co-ops and everything else. And so you have these state level regulated monopolies, and, I like the idea where markets are opened a bit to competition, and let the market, let that healthy competition deliver for the consumers and innovate and that sort of thing. So.
Amazing. Well, such an awesome discussion. Yeah, this is one that I've been wanting to do for a while, and we spent a lot of time actually talking about how to actually approach this because there's so many different rabbit holes and things you could go into, and this has been amazing. So, huge thank you to our panelists for this discussion. Okay, cool. So, a couple things. I wanted to just say some thank yous, couple quick announcements. I think you guys are probably cool to just hang up here for a second, and then we'll go around the room and have folks option to introduce yourself to everyone and what you're doing. So first announcements. First thank you. So thank you again to Pillsbury, truly huge supporters, and big thank you also to Escalon. Where's Mike? Mike, you want to say a little bit about what you do?
Thank you, Sean. I'm not sure how I feel about you making me follow this panel. Great job, you guys. And you guys, thank you for giving me just a couple of minutes here to give a little plug for Escalon. We've provided turnkey solutions for your essential but definitely not exciting back office to over 20,000 startups. Our services are divided up into 3 pillars. We provide financial operations support, people operations support, and tax service. I'm happy to go into as great a detail as anybody would like to after this, should you be interested. In the meantime, just know those are the services. And a little bit about us. We have, here in the U.S., we have around 50 CFOs, 100 controllers, and a dozen or so HR professionals on staff. Our CFOs, they can come in and help you with things like putting your pitch deck together, assist you with fundraising activities, consult you with managing your cap table, and much, much more. Our controller group, they come in and they handle things like AP and AR, deal with your T&E, your bank reconciliations, and most importantly, deliver close packages on a monthly basis that are diligence ready. On the people ops side of the house, our HR professionals come in and they assist with the day-to-day tasks like onboarding and offboarding, performance management, comp benchmarking, and so on. And then tax, our last pillar. On tax, we can handle your federal, your state compliance. We can also handle your state, local, and municipal use taxes. And we're very, very experienced with assisting clients with taking advantage of R&D tax credits. So that's our services in a nutshell. Again, I really appreciate being able to be a part of this. So thank you, Sean, and thank you, Lakshmi, wherever you are out there for, thank you very much. And hope we get to do it again soon.
Thanks so much, Mike. Okay, awesome. So a couple quick things for me. As I said at the start, we started this back in really 2023. It's grown a ton. Most folks who talk to me, there's 3 things we need to fully realize Austin's potential and Texas' potential when it comes to climate tech, clean energy. Connectivity in the ecosystem is a huge part of it, but it's also access to early stage capital. It's also the efficiency and the rate of innovation. And so this is what you see here is kind of the stuff that's publicly facing, but there's much bigger things that we're working on. And without going, thanks to our sponsors there. Without going too much into it, if you want to get involved, hit me up. This is really going to be the year for Austin Climate Up and making this truly real. So whether you want to maybe help out with some event planning and support, whether you're into marketing, branding, website, you've got PR media, you want to do some PR media, just anything you enjoy doing, it's a skill set, and you want to just be able to give back to the community more, or just be involved and be a part of this. I would love your help. Love to work with you. obviously here's a QR code. There's a little thing where you can just basically fill out what you're interested in doing. This is a non-binding commitment. We can talk about it. I won't hold you to it. But yeah, this is I think really going to be some exciting things happening this year, and truly want to keep this a communal effort. Then one very last thing. Also, Climate Hub has started to partner with EarthX out of Dallas. The EarthX eCapital Summit is a invite only. It's like 400 people. It's like 100 family offices, investors, industry executives. It's like literally one of the top innovation investing summits in the world. So just want to make this opportunity open to folks. So if you're an innovator, so whether you're an early stage startup or later stage startup, there's an amazing opportunity to apply, to pitch there. If you're an investor, you can raise capital there. It's investor to investor capital. It's just a really, really super high powered group. Innovation ecosystems. Some of you folks already know them. Grab one of the sheets, grab a QR code, check it out. I think it's an awesome opportunity to apply, and I would love to see as many folks there as possible. So with that, one of the fun parts now is us all getting to know each other. If you are doing anything in this space, I'm going to call on you, Jimmy. Just quick, like 20-second intro, right? Hey, I'm Sean, Austin Climate Hub. We're whatever. I'm Jimmy. We're a startup. This is what we do. Talk to me about this and that, and then we're done, and we'll get back to the drinks. Cool. Jimmy, you want to kick us off?
Hey guys, I'm Jimmy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Zero Electric. We're a local Austin startup. We're repurposing electric vehicle batteries, turning them into stationary energy storage systems for EV charging. So basically creating that buffer between what we've talked about a lot here, which is the infrastructure that's lacking and this new load that's coming on the grid. Electric vehicle charging is one of them that's very interesting, and we see an interesting synergy there between all of the adoption that's coming into EVs, creating this wealth of storage that's basically sitting in junkyards, and we're figuring out a way to use them to basically improve the grid. So nice to meet you guys.
Anyone else? Slightly shorter than Jimmy.
That's a pitch.
Hey, what's up, y'all? I'm Nevin. I'm a new angel with Central Texas Angel Network. I'm also affiliated with a few others, McKinsey, the ex-McKinsey Network as well. I'm looking at developing my investment thesis, and climate's one area I'm looking to grow. So I have a lot to learn because I know about zero about climate. So thank you.
Anyone else? Gabe, you want to go?
Good evening, I'm David from Savari. This is the world's first all-in-one solar panel. It's designed to help you save 20% on your solar installation on your house. And we're doing a crowdfunding campaign right now, so if you're all interested in being part of the difference that you want to see in the world, you can come talk to me later. Thanks.
Joe Murray, I'm CEO of P6. We're seed funded. We raised $26 million. We do life cycle assessments on renewable fuels, SAF, ethanol, renewable diesel, flat RNG, and we're also doing biogas. We're doing all biogas and renewable chemicals as well. SAF-based certified flat fuel.
My name's Duncan. I run an NGO called Clean Creatives. We're trying to get the advertising and PR industry to cut ties with fossil fuels. We would love to work with clean tech professionals here to help eliminate conflicts of interest in your PR and advertising chops if they are working to greenwash the polluters that are obstructing climate action.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm the founder and CEO of Sharp Energy. We're trying to act as the technical glue between companies, legislative branches, investment firms, the C-level experts that help to fill the gap, especially in batteries and solar and EMS. So happy to talk further about how we can help connect you all together.
My name is Griffin. I'm a pre-seed founder. First idea is to use AI and computer vision to bring recycling back to America. About 5% of all the stuff you put in the blue bin doesn't stay, it only stays here. The rest goes to the ocean or the Philippines. So trying to bridge the gap with sorting and bringing recycling back to America.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm with a company called Grid Beyond. We help companies who have battery strategies and make more money with those batteries optimization. We're Series C funding. We also help large energy users save our money through like demand response and funded batteries.
All right. Anyone else? We also have yeah. Go ahead.
I'll stand up here because I tend to be a little quieter. So my name is Jamie Harfrider. I work with Canadian Magnet Energy. We're a high temperature superconducting or HTS magnet company and subsystem company. So we're looking to build next generation energy systems that would go into fusion, space propulsion systems, and also grid infrastructure. If anyone has any interest in investing or talking about pilot projects, please find me.
Amazing.
Hey, Mike Chudy, with two companies represented here tonight. Archetype Energy, which is a development firm focused on the mid-market. We have $500 million ready to deploy in energy savings projects. And then Sustainment, which is an Austin-based early-stage company focused on supply chain, helping manufacturers grow and revitalize the supply chain in the U.S. So thanks, Jerry, for the invite.
Cool. Let's cut it there. Everyone here is in the industry. I know personally, so I think maybe it's easier for folks to do this over the networking. So we'll call it here. If you're interested in the Earthquake stuff, there's a bunch of forums there. Just grab those. But thank you again, everyone, for coming out. As I said to some of you folks, it's not a party if no one shows up. Super happy everyone's here. Huge thanks again to our panelists, and I'll see you out there.